Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing all fine. Thank you for attending this first webinar for merging for the Pyramix. We're going to talk about today Pyramix mastering, or Pyramix for mastering, to show you a little bit the workflow, what kind of files one can import, resolutions, how you put your things together, how you manage your timeline, then putting eventually some markers, some editing, top and tailing, analyzing the file, the signal flow in the mixer, adding of course some plugin or external effects, real time or non-real time, and then exporting all of that to different formats, more old style like a CD or a DVD, or of course more contemporary for different file formats for any kind of platforms. You may ask questions whenever you want via the chat in YouTube that I will try. I have two screens, so I have to go from back and forth from one to the other. So when I see it, I will either reply in audio by showing something, or reply by typing if necessary. Good. So I'm going to make my screen a bit smaller here, as you don't need to see me all the time. I'm going to put myself like this, and sorry, I'm gonna go here and start to show you all of that. Good. So the idea now is that in my Pyramix, first of all, I'm gonna import some audio media. So I will have some audio file folder that I just prepared before, and I will have different types of file formats in there. I can see I have some MP3 files, I have some IFF files, I have some WAV files. I just can drag and drop them and bring them straight away into my timeline. So Pyramix has this great possibility and capability that it just reads kind of everything it wants and it can without modifying anything from the file format. As soon as there's a need of a modification of the file format, it will ask you. So as long as it doesn't ask me anything, it just does it, and it can play back straight away all those different file formats in those different formats. So if I go into my media manager, I will see we won't hear anything for the moment. I just have to switch to mute. So there we see. I don't know exactly what it is, what type of music it is, but you can hear files of different types of music. Now, the interesting thing is that I have a media manager here that tells me a little bit. This is now the content of my folder, and it tells me a little bit exactly what I have in here. So I have obviously the names, the metadata, the time code, if any, and then I see here I have different subrates. They are old stereo files, so I didn't go further than that, but I have different subrates, different resolutions from 16 to 24-bit, to 32-bit, and some different formats, some WAV, PCM, broadcast WAV, but also some compressed file format that could be MP3, FLAC, or all other type of things, and some AIFF. And I see here when I'm going to bring in, for example, this 44.1 file, and I see that those files, if I click on that file, I have this blue little SR square there. That means that it is actually not accurate sample rate to my project. So in this project, I'm in 48K. Obviously, I could be 96 or 192 if I do mastering, or even higher in DXD and so on. Now, obviously, for connection reasons, to stream it over YouTube and so on, I've done it 48, and it makes it much easier. But I can play all different types of file formats and sample rates within the same timeline. Of course, I have the possibility, typically for mastering, then to go individually to each file or select a few at the same time and say, I want to sample rate this file to, from, to something, and so on. Same with resolution and all of that. Good. Now, the idea is that we're gonna now have those three different files, and I'm just gonna perhaps put them together like this. I could put them, of course, all on the same strip as well, and I just say then that I'm gonna use the menu so you know where it is. I'm gonna say that instead of a shortcut, I'm gonna spread them with, for example, 4 segments in between each other, and then we're ready. And there I could, again, if I would like to have them in different strips, because I might affect different plugins to those different files, if I would like to. Good. One important thing also is that I decided, and this you can change it in the menus, that I see the name of the clip, but I could also see the composer and other things. But one important thing, I see also the peak of the file. So I see that here I'm at -1.9 dB. So I could normalize this file, for example, and now it is normalized. It added the 1.9 dB to the file. I could also say, no, I want to keep something like, for example, 1 dB of headroom in case of something. So now, obviously, it added 0.9 dB. Or I just can say, again, I'm going to do undo, or simply, I can open my game and change whatever I want, what is good for me to change, to add or to remove gain from a clip on that aspect. And here, for example, I will have a much lower file, for example, in terms of the gain. Same thing. And one thing, of course, is that I always can enable my envelope, and I can do this if I want to, of course, and make something that is a bit more fluid in terms of the change of the game if I don't do the whole portion in one go. Good, I'm going to erase it because I don't need it anymore. Nice. So now, when you start, obviously, to have several types of amount of material, and you need to listen to all of them as well, and you want to take notes, for example. So you could say that at each beginning of the file, for example, first of all, I say this is my song 1. I can name, of course, but I'm too lazy for that for now. So this is song 2, for example, and I could say that I want to have it in purple or whatever color I want, and this will be song 3. And now those guys is the beginning of the song. So very quickly I could go from one to the other. I can do that with shortcuts, of course. So while I'm playing also, I can jump to song 2 and song 1. But I can of course put also markers in the middle because I want to change, I'm not sure, or I took some notes. I can do that of course while I'm reading. I'm reading here. I want to put this marker here, change to example, and I'm going to put this one, so I will have that. So now I can toggle very easily here, or I can go to my tabs, and in those different tabs I can again change the name or jump from one another, and this is where I apply a shortcut to those different markers if I want to. I would love an espresso. Especially it's the morning for me. For you guys in Asia, it's a little bit the afternoon already. Or perhaps a tea, I don't know. So the idea, going back to my timeline with those markers, I can of course then move the markers in the way I want, and they will be very useful now for navigating, and later on they will be very useful to be able to make my final files the way I want it together. In the idea that I can use those markers then to make my final export files, or my CD, or my DDP. You're gonna see all of that, which is quite interesting in the terms of how you deal with it. Great. Now I might do, of course, I'm gonna talk now about different steps in the mastering process. Those might, of course, be in another way around in your case, or depending the type of production you're going to do. But what is very clear is that you just to show you the different possibilities and the aspects, and then you can, of course, make them the way you want. So one thing I wanted to show is just basic top and tail. So you see that once I click on the file, the way I organized it in my session is that at the bottom now, I see here, I have my Crossfade Editor. So it means that if I bring in and make my file, it will straight away make a kind of a zoom of my crossfade, and I can draw kind of the fade I want and refine this fade. And of course I can listen to it. So I'm gonna perhaps change music because this is not so easy to recognize. I'm gonna try to bring or to take something a bit more straightforward. Yes, there we go. So now here I can, for example, make this type of crossfade, and we're gonna listen to it. I'm in a loop cycle, so it's gonna loop this fade until I'm happy to find the fade I want. Or I can use a very generic fade I wish to use, or I can save this fade in my library. So here on the right side, you won't see it because I have just my camera there, but you will understand it in a second. On the right side, I can have a menu where I can save this preset, and I'm going to call it Web 1. And this preset now appears. Oh, you don't understand my microphone, okay? So I'm gonna level it up a little bit. Tell me if this is then better. I hope so. Sorry for that. We made some tests yesterday, and I thought it was good. Is that better? I hope so. Good. So the idea is that once you have your fade in here, for example, I'm gonna go now to my library, and my library is over there, fade library, and this fade library is now inherited to my system, not anymore to this project. And I have here some different fades that I can just then, once I know exactly what they are, apply them wherever I want, wherever I like them, and the curve is straight away the one I did. Okay, this is for the fade in. Fade out is obviously the same exercise, but just reversed in this sense. And then we have the crossfade. So I make a cut in the middle here. So the cut, you either select it and you click on it and you make a cut, or you press the letter C, and then you make the cut wherever you want. And once this cut is done, you see here the fade out and the fade in. One thing to add and to say is that this is a stereo file, but I only see the left track. Okay, I could go down to see the right track. This is my setting here. If I want, I can see both tracks, and I will work on both tracks. It's just for viewing, I find it more comfortable to just see one track. But again, everyone does it the way they want it in their proper configuration. And then you can start to change the fade out of your crossfade, to change the curve of your fade out, and the same thing to change the fade in. And of course, you can listen to that while you listen to that. So this is then the process of the Crossfade Editor. When I'm gonna, in another webinar, in a few days, I don't remember by heart now, next week I think, I'm gonna make things about multi-track, and they are gonna go much more in depth about the fade editor. So you might stay on at that moment if you want to have more information about the Crossfade Editor. But these are basically the basics. It is a zoom window with all the different types of possibilities of listening, pre-listening, and so on of it. And it's a zoom about the fade you just selected on the timeline. And with all, of course, the nice bits where you can slide media inside without changing the configurations and so on. Good. Bringing me a bit further now, it brings me to my mixer and to the signal path. So one thing which is crucial in Pyramix is that, this is my mixer, is that you have to understand, like in every workstation, how the signal is going through my mixer and how you can sum it, how you can manipulate it and how you can resend it inside to make some added summing to it, typically in masking. So, for instance, here I have created 4 stereo strips for the moment, 1, 2, 3, 4 here, and a 5th one, which is this one below. This would be for my real-time recording, if I would have some external inputs coming in, for example, via an analog compressor, or an external compressor, or EQ, or this type of things. I'm going to look at it a little bit later. Now, the thing is that, first of all, if I, and here I'm going to mute the sound of my workstation, because I'm going to enable a little generator. And I can see that this generator here now will provide some audio, and of course, if I have some plugins enabled, the right one everywhere. So I just disable them, and it's going to make it much more smooth, but there we go. So now if I follow the signal, so first of all, I come in here. I have my physical connections that are set up here as an input. I have a delay that I can set up there if I want. And now I have my signal coming in. And if I go here, I see that I have different colors. Those colors represent the different buses I have. So I have here, for example, this green color, which is what we call a mixed group. And then we have this blue, the same thing with this pink mixed group. And then we have a blue and a brownish color, which are my physical outputs. You see down here, it has a physical kind of XLR where I can go out. And those ones have like an arrow saying there's a send and return. So that means that for the moment, I send this signal into my green bus. And this green bus sends it back into my blue bus that sends it out via an internal bus that could be a physical output, for example. I don't have any physical gear here, but to show you physical output. And this goes back into here, and now I compensate the delay. And this delay compensation allows me to record in my master, so that will be recorded in those tracks. And those tracks finally will then be set out on my kind of, what is that, salmon brown color, beige color, going out to my final master output. And this is now for the moment the workflow or the way I set it up to be able to make my mastering. So it allows me to put plugins to make some summing from 2 different, for example, signals with the blue, with the green and the pink bus, and then finally to go through an analog chain if I want to be able to add some analog effect or processing to my signal. Now, if I open here, I will start to understand how this all functions. But first of all, my signal there from my generator, I see that I have all the access to all my different buses. So if I would like to send it straight away to my final output, I just press route. Okay, and now it will add it. I see it here, and I remove it again. One thing that is very important and interesting to observe is that you see this green here. That means is that my delay is properly compensated at this very moment. If it would be red, it would say it's not compensated at this present moment, and I could click on it so that to force the system to compensate it again. Now, when I will click this signal, because I sent now my signal over here in this green bus, in this group, back here in this blue, going out, going back in, and finally to my final output. So if I now click straight away the signal to my output, and so to say bypass, because there is a latency at any point, bypass this latency and go straight back and adding both signals together, you will see that this green D will in a millisecond turn into red and then turn into green again. There we go. Now it is compensated again. So Pyramix is constantly compensating or making a delay compensation so that whatever you sum together, you always sum per accurate. If I press it again, and of course now I added those 2 signals together. Now if I press it again, it will remove it slightly for 1 second, of course, or a millisecond, it was compensating the delay, and now I'm compensating again. So this is, you can of course disable this delay compensation if you want to, but as long as you work inside the system, it is very interesting. Or in the box, so to say. Now, about the return here of this aspect, I have what we call an internal bus return here, and I clicked here to say I want to compensate automatically my delay compensation from my bus M1. Now, if I would have a physical device, a physical machine connected like an EQ, for example, sending it out here, converting it to an analog EQ, converting it back to go into my mixer, then I wouldn't compensate it here. I would say input, and I would type in my delay compensation there in samples. Whatever it is required, I can make it that way so that it will shift back the whole mixer in terms so that I have my playback from my files and my return from my mix at the same sample, and I can, for example, compare it or resum it back again. So let me go back into the M1 so that we're fully delay compensated. And now we have those little, sorry, and now we have those little routing possibilities and routing tools. So first of all, obviously, the first dot here is to select that I'm in the mixer or not, or basically I'm sending this signal into this green dot. Right? I can do that the same with the purple, with the blue, with all the other ones, or all them together. And now once it is sent here, if I click, on the router below on this little dots there, it opens me my little routing channel tool. That means that I can independently have here a little trim of my left and of my right. By default, it puts it at 0 left, 0 right, because it makes sense to have a stereo strip going to a stereo bus. But if I would have a mono strip going to a stereo bus, it will automatically put it to -3 left, -3 right, and so on. So if I then have more complex thing, let's say having a MS strip going to a 5.1 bus, 9.1 bus, then of course I have those different types of things where it doesn't really know what to do because there are no rules, and therefore I can then add the different gains or reductions I need to in there. The same appears everywhere, obviously. Nevertheless, I then can, of course, say I don't want to have this router, I want a panner. And now I'm going to use the panner below, because to make it very clear is that until now I can move my panner, it has 0 effect because I'm on the router. To have an effect that something happens or appears, I have to go to the panner. And now I can pan my signal left and right. So I have a stereo panner. So if I right-click, I then have some interesting things, and they're again very, very relevant in my opinion for mastering, is that I can, for example, say that I want a pan balance, which I'm now, or I can have a dual pan. So here now, independently, I can pan my left channel and my right channel, and you see that the behavior is totally different. And I would go like this extreme on both to be able to have the same effect as before. So if you need to readjust the mix or something in your mastering process, this is a very interesting little feature. The same thing is that you can then go to the single pan, which is another way that you move basically with the same 60 degrees left and right your entire mix, and you cannot go to the extreme. So let me go back to the normal balance. Now, how do I modify, or how do I add a bus, or how do I modify a bus, or how do I, for example, add a panner? Because this is very interesting. I could say I want a specific panner sending me my thing in my green bus, but I also want to send it on a chain that is here in my pink bus, but I want to have a different pattern. So I could say that I right-click again, bus, and I can say here panning control. So now I have two panning control buses that will be sent into my bus, and I can then modify them and change them the way I want it. Yeah, sorry, it's a bit slow because streaming from the same computer, from the same laptop, with a Pyramix on the top and so on, it's not the easiest task to do, but it all works fine. So I'm going to put them all to pan balance, and now this is my panel 1, this is my panel 2, and I'm going to say here, this one, I want actually my panel 2 to work. So you will see now on the pink group, I will have the effect of this panel, and on the green group, I will have the effect on that panel. So now obviously it has the effect on the other ones because the green one is sent in the master bus. Now I will send both in the master bus. So now both will have an effect, but different. And there you can start to create some phasing effect, or if you receive the phase mix, some unphasing effects, for example. So interesting things about that. Good. Let me go back to router so I don't create mess. I just stop for the moment. Very basic. Last thing I haven't explained, just show it quickly, is that in my bus here, I can then also add some different mix groups and functionalities. So just to explain it quickly, this is how I add a bus. So I have the mix buses, which are the blue and the kind of salmony browny one, and the mix group, which is the green and the pinky one. So the group is send return inside, and the bus is a physical output. And then you go. You choose from stereo, or you can make a custom if you want to make something on your own. And you have all the standard formats up to immersive with different types of OR, Dolby Atmos, and so on, up to NHK 22.2, and you have ambisonic up to the 7th order. So this is valid for buses, but obviously as well for others. So you're completely free of doing whatever you want. Then you have the aux buses and the aux groups, same philosophy, same way of functioning. So you have physical outputs with the buses, and you have send returns with the groups, like for plugins, for example, and things like that. And then you have object buses for immersive work, object-based audio work, for music or for post-production. Good. And then you add those different buses the way you need, and you can always modify them. That means here I click on the stereo, and it opens my my bus management from this bus, where I could transform it into whatever I need. So in the middle of the production, somebody's saying, no, we're not going to work in stereo, we're going to work in 5.1 now. You can modify it whenever you want without losing your panning or your work or your automation, because it's separate, as you could understand. The bus is separate from the panner. They work together, but they're independent, and this makes it very powerful. Good. Let me close all of that again, so that I have my nice little colors, as you saw it at the beginning. And so we can see that this one is set to those two buses at the same time. Those two buses are sent to the blue one that outputs it over there. Good. Now, plugins. I have here different plugins that I have already installed or initiated. Obviously, like everywhere, you right-click and you go add PS3, which are our own plugins, or from other manufacturers, but are on our own platform, so very low latency. But we also support PS3 plugins that you can add wherever you want. And then you enable your plugin. So the yellow one is to switch it on and off, and this one is to bypass it on and off. So obviously I'm going to take my, well, I can keep it for a moment. And this is bypass, and you can change your plugin and phase linearity, for example, where you do all of that whatever you want. But then here, and I'm not going to talk about now how to manage those plugins. I mean, this, you know it, or we're going to do it on another webinar. This is a Solera, very nice compressor, the expander, and so on. And you have your FAT filters, for example, over here. Yes, evaluate. And you can change your different types of things you need to change in your settings. me now remove this generator, and let's talk a little bit about the final thing, which is important, is monitoring. So you see here, I have different icons, and one of them is my monitoring section. To make it very quickly, because I don't want to now spend a lot of time, because we have 15 minutes to see the output. Here I have my different sources. This is basically a reproduction of the buses I have. So I have my two mixed groups that are here, 1 and 2, and my two main buses, or mixed buses. Sorry, these are the mixed groups, excuse me, and these are the mixed buses, 1 and 2. And then in configure, I set up the different speaker sets I want. So for the moment, I just have a headphone in this area where I'm working in, but I could have 1 speaker sets, 1 or whatever it is, binaural output or whatever is required, and I could toggle here from one speaker set to another with its downmix. And now I can choose what I want to listen to. But I can also, for example, make some combinations of the left channel of bus 1 and the right channel of bus 2 if needed. But, I mean, it's a real monitoring section, a complete monitoring section. Very useful for typically mastering. And I have the volume, mute, dim, the configure, what we've seen. I have some external inputs. So this is also interesting when I want to listen, for example, from a DVD player or SACD player or CD player, or just from a computer playing a file back in. I could use this as an external machine. I could call this computer audio and then set my physical inputs. But it means that now this is the source like the other ones. So I could compare, I could A/B something, okay, from my favorite record or something that I try to find for my customer. And then last but not least, but absolutely not very much used in mastering process, obviously, it's the talkback. So I can set up talkbacks, send them in different buses and so on. Good. Now, coming to my mastering process. I will now start to play my different files. I made my best plugins ever, whatever I've done. And I can measure all of this a little bit in my final check that you find here next to the mixer as well. So that I can loudness meter fully, badly organized what I've done, whatever. I can have my loudness metering, I have my BPM, my true peak, and everything what is required for proper metering on that aspect, where you can go onto the setup and change all of what is needed. I'm not going to go through that now, but obviously it has everything required. Good. This is a real-time process, the analyze. And then now I can say, first of all, I would simply like, I have different ways of exporting this things or this final files. The first thing, obviously, would be just to select this song, for example, and to say project and mixdown. Mixdown is basically our bounce tool, and you give a name, and you can make different outputs as a single media, but you could do also different outputs with different stems. That means if you would do directly a bus with a more compressed and a less compressed mix, you do both at the same time. You don't need to do one after each other. So you gain a lot of time with that. This is the file format you export. So again in PCM, or you can directly do a FLAC files if you want to. And the resolution, but you can SRC it again at this time, and also loudness fine-tune it to something that is required for broadcast, for example. And these are the groups you choose, and you go. Many more things, but I'm not gonna make everything right now, because otherwise there's a lack of time. And the other way, so this would be one piece after each other, and you just export your different things. The other possibility, of course, is what we've seen before, is then to record back in, because you have some physical outputs going back in here, and you would have to play back something that you record, that I would record now, and here I'm recording. I'm not recording. Why am I not recording? Oh, it's just the waveform is just very small, because I just put the signal very low. So if I put it a bit higher, we see it there. Good. Just to show you quickly. So I can record down there and then apply the same markers and render it just as a final file, for example. But now the very interesting process, and this is where it comes to the real mastering. You remember all those markers we put in at the beginning? So those markers now, I could also say, let me go to the markers list here, that I take them and I right click and I say create a CD disk. So creating a CD disk with our vocabulary, it doesn't mean only creating a CD. It is still, you see in the timeline now, I added all these different, let me just make that fixed. And now it added all those different CDPQs here where my markers are. So yes, these are CDPQs, but I can use them for many things. The first of all, I can close the mixer to see a little bit better what's happening here. First of all, I see that this is my disk, and I can already give some metadata. But before that, these are my songs, so to say. So song 1, song 2, song 3. I can, of course, double click and jump from one to the other. And these are just my markers. So if I modify things here, it will modify my timeline. If I modify things here, it's just a marker. Actually, this is not a song. This was just a marker I took while I was listening. So I made a mistake. So I can just eliminate that one. I say right click and actually delete marker. Yes. And the same thing with that one, which was wrong as well, the change to compression. I just delete the marker. Okay, obviously you have shortcuts for all of that. I just show it with the mouse so that you know where you can find those things. So those are now still pure basic markers like before, but not CD EQ markers for songs. So now I have my 3 songs, and it took the name of my markers. I can of course modify them here, and here I can start to fill in all the needed metadata. For example, the songwriter, which is me. The composer, it is not me, and the arranger is it. It's both. And the genre and the disc title, it is ABC, and so on. And those things here now with the right click, I have CD text. Set all track CD text from disk info. The disk info is just what I did now. So those track songwriters, composers, and so on, and I say okay. And I see now here, it took all those things from my tab, so to say, over there. And last but not least, I can again say also the text, set track title from track names, and they're all here. And oh, I forgot the genre, so I can also change it there if I want to have it. Let's put the 9. Oh, that's good. Of course, if I now have the song number 2, where the song is the songwriter is me and the other, I can modify it uniquely if I need on those aspects. And the performer, and so on, and so on. Everything can be filled in, of course, and changed. ICRC codes as well, so I can just click them again. I right-click, and I say generate. And of course, it took this base that I can modify, and I can say, no, I want it, this is number 5, and this takes it number 5 now. All of it, and I can say, if I want to increment them, ICRC increment section 5, 6, 7, and so on. So you don't need to retype them all the time whenever you want. Then you can display the talk if you really going to do a CD. Okay, that's not our interest for the moment. I need to export this as a file format, and you will understand one thing, or a CD if I want to. Sorry, one thing before that. I just reopened my mixer quickly. You remember that at the very beginning, we talked about the mix. Sorry, we talked about the different files, and we had 16-bit files, 24-bit files, whatever it is, different resolutions. We are in 48K, so we know that the sample rate will be 48K. It could be 96 or 192 or whatever it is. But here I have a ditter, and here I could enable my ditter if I want to. For example, now my ditter is enabled, and I could say I want to have it 24-bit for everything, or 16-bit if I need to, so I just activate whatever is needed or required on the final output. End project, and now I will go on to generate master. And my generate master in there, this is exactly where it becomes very interesting. You see that I have here my table of content, and I'm gonna either, I could do DSD edit and digital release. We're not talking about DSD at the moment. This is gonna be another session of a webinar. But here, if we talk about standard PCM, we can either do straight away Redbook CD image for those who still need to do CD. But the most interesting, we do what we call a digital release. The digital release is taking actually the sample rate of my session. So it's going to make everything together, mix, pack, sum, and add the metadatas. If I would be in 192 kilohertz, it would make it in 192. So it will keep the best resolution it has. Sorry, the sample rate, 48 for the moment, because that's the session I'm in, but I could change it, resolution, 24-bit. And we could then give a name to it, whatever, it could be my first songs, and where I put it, there. So this is just a folder, but I can make it somewhere else. And here now, what is my final source of my mix? So it's going to be mix 2. One thing, I'm working here in stereo. If I would work in 5.1, I could do it as well, or in other formats. And here I could reorder the different speaker mapping. So it could be, for example, that I'm working in LCR if I'm in 5.1, but I need to provide the LRC. So this is where I can change it and modify this type of things. And then this is where it becomes very interesting. I might do this digital release, but I will need to provide all different types of file formats. So it could be an MP3, it could be an IFF, it could be a FLAC files, and so on. And this is where I start to set up different types of combinations. So these are all the different types of file formats I could export. And I see here I have also a CD image. So I could do first a digital release because I need to provide files. And later on, my customer asks me, oh, but we need a CD as well. So you can still do it there because you can do that now, or you can do it later on. We have a little tool called album publishing. You're going to see it in a second. So extract those files from those different, this MTFF PCM file, extract those files to do all these different types of things now or later. And here you change, you go back to sample rates, resolutions, FLAC 16-bit if I want to, apodizing or phase linear, and so on. And now I added this, and I just select the ones I want. One file per track or continuous. What is from my metadata in the file description? I can, of course, change the order or add this and whatever. And I can make this in this folder or in different folders. So I can also separate this in different folders. And when I say OK, if I would say start now, it will make this PCM digital release and at the same time make all those different exports one after each other. And later on, if your customer is saying, oh, but you forget to do this format, or finally, I would like to have a CD or a DDP, you then can recall a little application called album publishing that is here. Sorry, album publisher, not publishing, that is here, and that opens in the other screen. There we go. And you would then reach back to your file. This is something else that was another project. You can have it straight away there, and you can do your different exports from there on a later stage. For those who still do DDP, there's another process that is very particular, let's say, another way of doing it. You first have to do a disk image because it's in 44 1/16-bit. And once you've done your disk image, then you can open it. It's opening now. It's quite a big amount of windows altogether. There we go. And I bring it here. I'm gonna open this. It's disk image that I have to open. Open disk image there, and this is here. No, I don't want those errors. And this is here where you choose a DDP folder, and you can do your DDP export to send it to the factory. If this is still a process you're doing. So I went quite fast, but I hope that, open my camera again. I hope that you enjoyed it and you've learned something. Thank you very much for attending, and hope to see you next time. Bye bye.